My name is Dawood. I'm 34 years old, and on September 8th, 2019, I died for 8 minutes in a hospital in Riyadh. I was a Saudi prince who thought I had everything: wealth, power, influence. But that night, gunmen ambushed me during what I thought was a safe family meeting. That evening started like any other family business meeting. My cousin Khalid had called me 3 days earlier, his voice carrying that familiar mix of urgency and secrecy that usually meant money was involved. He said there were some complications with our joint investment in the telecommunications project, something about regulatory approval and the need for immediate decisions. Nothing unusual for our family's business dealings. I remember driving through the streets of Riyadh that night, watching the city lights blur past my bulletproof Mercedes. My bodyguards Verti, Rashid and Omar sat in the front seats discussing football scores, their voices relaxed and casual. We had done this routine hundreds of times before. Family meetings were sacred in our culture, protected spaces where even enemies would honor the code of hospitality. I felt completely safe. The meeting was set for a private villa in the diplomatic quarter, one of those sprawling compounds where my extended family conducted sensitive business away from prying eyes. As we pulled through the gates, I noticed more cars than usual parked in the circular driveway. Khalid had mentioned bringing a few other cousins to discuss the financial details, but the number of vehicles suggested a larger gathering than I had expected. Walking into the marble foyer, I was greeted by the familiar scents of Arabic coffee and burning oud incense. The sounds of conversation drifted from the main salon, voices I recognized from childhood gatherings and recent business ventures. Everything felt normal, even comfortable. Khalid embraced me warmly, his beard scratchy against my cheek, as we exchanged the traditional greeting. His eyes met mine briefly, and I caught something there I had never seen before. A flicker of something that might have been regret, or perhaps fear. The salon was arranged in the traditional style, with low cushions arranged in a circle around expensive Persian carpets. About 15 men were present, all family members or close associates I had known for years. Some were deep in conversation about oil prices, others were checking their phones for stock market updates from international exchanges. The atmosphere was exactly what I expected from a routine family business meeting. As I settled onto my usual cushion near the head of the circle, my cousin Ahmed handed me a small glass of sweet tea. The liquid was still steaming, and I wrapped my fingers around the warm glass, feeling the heat seep into my palms. We spent the first 20 minutes discussing mundane family matters. Uncle Fahad's daughter was getting married next month. Cousin Saeed's son had been accepted to study engineering in London. Normal conversation that felt like a gentle prelude to whatever serious business had brought us together. Have you ever had a moment where everything you thought was secure suddenly collapsed? Where the ground beneath your feet simply disappeared without warning? That moment came for me at exactly 9:47 p.m. according to the antique clock that hung above the fireplace. Khalid was in the middle of explaining some complex financial restructuring when I heard Omar, my bodyguard, clear his throat sharply. It was a signal we had established years ago, his way of alerting me to potential danger without causing alarm. I glanced toward him and saw his hand resting casually on his concealed weapon. His eyes were scanning the room with sudden intensity, no longer the relaxed football fan from the car ride. The change in atmosphere was subtle but unmistakable. Conversations had grown quieter. Several men were checking their watches. Someone by the window kept glancing outside toward the courtyard. My instincts, honed by years of navigating family politics and business rivalries, began screaming warnings. Something was very wrong. I started to rise from my cushion, planning to suggest we postpone the meeting, when the first shots rang out. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, like thunder exploding inside my skull. The ornate chandelier above us shattered. sending crystal fragments raining down like deadly confetti. Men were shouting, diving for cover behind furniture, scrambling toward exits that suddenly seemed impossibly far away. The burning sensation hit my chest first, a white, hot pain that spread through my torso like liquid fire. I looked down and saw dark stains spreading across my white thobe, the fabric growing heavy and wet. My legs gave out, and I crashed onto the marble floor, the impact jarring every bone in my body. The beautiful Persian carpet beneath me was turning crimson, and I realized with strange detachment that it was my blood creating those spreading patterns. More gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Windows exploded inward, spraying glass across the room. I could hear Omar shouting my name, his voice growing more distant despite the fact that he was crawling toward me across the floor. Rashid was returning fire, his pistol barking repeatedly as he tried to reach my position. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the metallic scent of blood and the lingering sweetness of the incense. My vision was starting to blur, but I could see men in black masks moving through the room with military precision. These were not random thieves or political terrorists. This was a coordinated assassination, planned and executed by people who knew exactly where I would be and when. The betrayal cut deeper than the bullets. Pain was radiating from my chest and abdomen, each breath becoming a monumental effort. I could feel my life draining away with each heartbeat, pooling beneath me on the cold marble. My thoughts became fragmented, jumping between childhood memories and desperate prayers. I thought about my mother, who would receive news of my death before midnight. I thought about business deals that would never be completed, promises that would never be kept. Through the chaos, I managed to whisper what I thought would be my final words. Allah, forgive my sins. My voice was barely audible above the continued gunfire and shouting, but somehow it felt like the most important thing I had ever said. The room was growing darker, sounds becoming muffled and distant, as if I was sinking underwater. Then everything stopped. The pain vanished instantly. The chaos faded to complete silence, and I found myself floating above it all, looking down at my own body, lying motionless on that blood-soaked carpet. I was floating above the chaos, watching the entire scene unfold below me like some twisted movie. My body lay motionless on the Persian carpet, arms splayed at unnatural angles, the white fabric of my thobe now completely soaked in crimson. Blood was still seeping from the wounds in my chest and abdomen, creating an expanding pool that reflected the broken chandelier's remaining light. It was a stranger sensation, seeing myself from above while feeling completely detached from that lifeless form. The gunmen were still moving through the room with calculated precision, but their shots had stopped. They were checking bodies, confirming their work was complete. Omar lay near the overturned coffee table, his hand still reaching toward where I had fallen. Rashid was slumped against the wall, his weapon fallen from his grasp. The entire assassination had taken less than 3 minutes from start to finish. I tried to call out to Omar, to let him know I was somehow still there, but no sound came. I had no voice, no physical form that could interact with the scene below. I was pure consciousness hovering in a space between the marble ceiling and the carnage, watching my own death play out in real time. The realization hit me with crushing force. I was dead. Actually, truly dead. Within minutes, paramedics burst through the salon doors, their equipment clattering as they rushed toward the bodies. I watched them work on my corpse with desperate efficiency, pressing electrodes to my chest, injecting medications into veins that no longer carried flowing blood. One of them was shouting numbers at his partner, medical terms I did not understand, but their urgency told me everything I needed to know. They were fighting for a life that had already left. Family members began arriving, their faces twisted with shock and grief. My younger brother Faisal stumbled into the room and immediately collapsed when he saw my body. His wailing filled the space, a sound of pure anguish that cut through me even in my disembodied state. My uncle Mohammed was shouting orders at the paramedics, demanding they do more, try harder, refuse to give up. But I could see what he could not. There was nothing more they could do for the shell I had left behind. The strangest part was how clearly I could think. Death had not brought confusion or disorientation to my mind. Instead, my thoughts were sharper and more focused than they had ever been in life. I could see everything happening in the room simultaneously, understanding conversations and actions that would have been impossible to track with physical senses. It was as if consciousness itself had been freed from the limitations of flesh and blood. I remained floating there for what felt like hours, but could have been minutes, watching the paramedics load my body onto a stretcher and rush it toward waiting ambulances. The room emptied gradually, leaving only bloodstains and broken glass as evidence of the violence that had occurred. Crime scene investigators arrived with cameras and measuring equipment, documenting every detail of the assassination. I followed my body to the ambulance, then to the hospital, hovering above the emergency room as doctors continued their futile attempts at resuscitation. Then something changed. A force I could not see or understand began pulling me away from the hospital, away from my body, away from everything familiar. It started as a gentle tugging sensation, or like being drawn by invisible hands, but quickly intensified into an irresistible current. I found myself being pulled through what could only be described as a tunnel, though it was unlike any physical passage I had ever experienced. The tunnel was composed entirely of darkness, but not the simple absence of light I had known in life. This was darkness with substance and weight, pressing against me from all directions. The walls seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, and I could hear sounds echoing from somewhere far ahead. Not voices exactly, but something that communicated suffering and despair without words. The temperature dropped dramatically, and I felt cold, penetrating to my very core, even though I no longer had a physical body to feel temperature. As I moved deeper into the tunnel, the darkness became more oppressive. It was not just the absence of light, but the presence of something actively hostile to light, something that sought to snuff out hope and joy and love. The walls seemed to be closing in, though they maintained the same distance from me throughout the journey. Terror began building in my consciousness, a fear unlike anything I had experienced in 34 years of life. The sounds ahead grew louder and more distinct. I could hear weeping, but not the clean grief of mourning. This was the sound of despair without hope of relief, suffering without possibility of end. There were also voices calling out in languages I recognized and others completely foreign, all united by the same tone of anguish and regret. The darkness carried their cries like a conductor channeling electricity, amplifying the pain until it became almost unbearable. Memories of my life began flooding through my consciousness with violent intensity, not the gentle nostalgia of pleasant recollection, but a harsh examination of every moment when I had chosen pride over humility, power over compassion, self-interest over service to others. I saw myself dismissing servants as if they were furniture, ignoring beggars outside mosque gates, using my influence to crush business competitors without regard for the families they supported. The tunnel stretched endlessly ahead, and I realized with growing horror that I was traveling towards some form of judgment, not the merciful accounting I had always imagined from Allah, but something far more terrible and final. Every cruel word I had spoken, every opportunity for kindness I had rejected, every moment of arrogance and selfishness was laid bare before some unseen witness. Look inside your own heart, right now. What would be revealed if all your secrets, all your hidden motivations, all your private moments of cruelty or selfishness were exposed to perfect light? That examination was happening to me in the crushing darkness of that tunnel, and I was found completely wanting. The man I had been in life, the prince who had commanded respect and wielded power, was revealed as nothing more than a collection of fears and failures dressed in expensive clothing. I tried calling out to Allah, desperately reciting prayers I had learned in childhood, but my voice seemed to be swallowed by the darkness before it could travel beyond my immediate presence. The familiar words of the Quran that had always brought comfort now felt hollow and meaningless. I was alone in that terrible place, more alone than I had ever imagined possible, falling deeper into a darkness that had no bottom and no escape. The terror was complete and absolute. I was dead, traveling toward judgment, and I knew with perfect clarity that I was not prepared for what awaited me at the end of that endless tunnel. I was falling through that suffocating darkness for what felt like eternity when suddenly everything changed. A pinprick of light appeared far ahead, so small, at first, that I thought my consciousness might be creating illusions, but the light grew brighter and larger as I continued moving through the tunnel, not the harsh, fluorescent brightness of hospital rooms or the flickering flames of oil lamps, but something entirely different. This light was alive, pulsing with warmth and what I can only describe as pure love. The darkness around me began to retreat, not gradually but instantly, as if it could not coexist with whatever was producing that radiance. The oppressive weight that had been crushing my spirit lifted completely, replaced by a sensation of weightlessness that was joyful rather than terrifying. The sounds of anguish and despair that had been echoing through the tunnel faded to silence, replaced by something that might have been music, though no earthly instruments could have produced those harmonies. As I drew closer to the light source, I could see that it was not coming from some distant star or celestial body, but from a figure walking toward me through the tunnel. The being was clothed in garments that seemed to be woven from light itself, brilliant white fabric that moved with every step but never dimmed or flickered. The closer this figure came, the more intense the warmth became, not the burning heat of fire, but the gentle warmth of perfect love embracing every part of my being. When the figure was close enough for me to see clearly, I knew immediately who he was, though I had never seen him before in my life. This was Jesus, the one my Islamic teachers had called Isa, the prophet I had been taught to respect but never worship. Yet looking at him now, I understood with perfect clarity that he was far more than any prophet. The love radiating from his presence was not the love of a created being, but the love of the Creator himself. His face was unlike any human face I had ever seen, beautiful beyond description, but marked with lines that spoke of deep suffering. His eyes held the wisdom of eternity, but also the compassion of someone who had experienced every form of human pain. When those eyes met mine, I felt completely known, as if he could see every thought I had ever had, every secret I had ever kept, every sin I had ever committed. Yet instead of condemnation, I saw only perfect understanding and inexplicable love. He spoke my name, and his voice contained more music than all the orchestras of earth combined. Dawood. That single word carried such tenderness, such intimate knowledge of who I was, and who I was meant to be, that I immediately collapsed before him. In life, I had commanded the respect of servants and bowed only to my earthly father and to Allah during prayers. But in the presence of this being, falling to my knees felt as natural as breathing had once been. "I have known you since before you were born," he said, and somehow I understood that this was literally true. He had been present at my first breath, aware of my first thought, watching over every moment of my life even when I was completely unaware of his existence. "You have been searching for truth your whole life, Dawood." The words hit me with the force of absolute revelation. I had been searching for truth, though I had not realized it until that moment. All the religious duties I had performed, all the business success I had achieved, all the respect I had commanded as a prince, none of it had satisfied the deep longing in my soul for something real and lasting and meaningful. I had been hungry for truth without knowing what I was hungry for. Tears began flowing from my eyes, though I was not certain how I could cry without a physical body. The weeping came from somewhere deeper than flesh, from the core of my being where all my failures and regrets and unfulfilled longings had been stored. I wept for the servant I had dismissed without a second thought when she begged for help with her sick child. I wept for the business partners I had cheated, justifying my actions as shrewd negotiation. I wept for every moment of pride that had separated me from genuine connection with other people. "Why do you weep, my son?" Jesus asked, and the gentleness in his voice only made me cry harder. "I am not worthy," I managed to say through my sobs. "I have sinned greatly. I have lived for myself, cared only for my own interests, ignored the poor and the suffering. I have been proud and arrogant and cruel." Instead of agreeing with my self-condemnation, Jesus knelt beside me in the light-filled space. "That is exactly why I came for you," he said, and his words carried such certainty that I looked up to meet his gaze again. "Dawood, you think your sins disqualify you from my love, but they are precisely the reason I sought you out." The concept was so foreign to everything I had been taught about divine justice that I could barely comprehend it. In Islam, I had learned that Allah was merciful to those who earned mercy through righteous deeds and proper observance of religious law. But Jesus was saying something entirely different. He was claiming that he had come specifically because of my sins, not in spite of them. "I do not understand," I whispered. "I know," he replied, and he smiled with such warmth that it felt like sunrise after the longest night. "Understanding will come. For now, simply receive my love." He reached out and touched my forehead with his hand, and the contact sent waves of pure love through every part of my being. It was not romantic love or familial affection or even deep friendship, but something far beyond human categories. This was the love that had created the universe, the love that sustained every living thing, the love that had been waiting my entire life to be received and returned. In that touch, I felt every sin I had ever committed being washed away, not because I had earned forgiveness, but because he was choosing to give it freely. The guilt and shame that had been accumulating for 34 years simply disappeared, replaced by a peace I had never imagined possible. I was clean, forgiven, accepted, beloved, not because I deserved it, but because he decided I was worth dying for. "I am the way, the truth, and the life," Jesus said, and now I understood what those words meant in ways no theological study could have taught me. He was not merely pointing toward truth, or teaching truth, or even embodying truth. He was truth itself, the reality behind all other realities, the answer to every question my soul had ever asked. Jesus gestured with his hand, and suddenly the space around us transformed into something like a vast theater, where the scenes of my entire life began playing out in vivid detail. But this was not like watching a movie or recalling memories. I was experiencing every moment again with perfect clarity, seeing not just what had happened, but understanding the deeper spiritual realities that had been invisible to me at the time. The first scene that appeared was from my childhood, when I was perhaps 7 years old. I saw myself sitting alone in the marble courtyard of our palace, surrounded by expensive toys, but crying because no other children were allowed to play with me. The isolation of royalty had begun early, creating walls between me and genuine human connection. But now I could see something I had never noticed before. Jesus had been there with me in that courtyard, sitting beside my younger self, sharing my loneliness and my tears. "I was always with you, Dawood," he said softly, "even when you could not see me." The scene shifted to show me at age 12, lying in my bed after another day of private tutoring and religious instruction. I remembered that night clearly because I had stared at the ceiling for hours, feeling a strange emptiness despite having everything a child could want. What I had not remembered was the dream that came later, a dream where a figure of light had stood at the foot of my bed, speaking words of comfort I could not quite recall upon waking. Now I understood. God had been reaching for me even then, trying to fill the void that wealth and position could never satisfy. More childhood memories flowed past, each one revealing moments when divine love had attempted to touch my life through small kindnesses, unexpected conversations, or quiet stirrings in my heart during prayer. I saw the elderly servant who used to tell me stories about God's mercy when my parents were busy with state affairs. I had dismissed her as simple and uneducated, but now I could see the wisdom and genuine faith that had radiated from her weathered face. She had been one of God's messengers, and I had been too proud to listen. The scenes moved into my teenage years, and these memories were harder to watch. I saw myself at 15, striking a servant boy who had accidentally dropped a tray of food near my feet. The humiliation and fear in that child's eyes had registered with me for only a moment before I dismissed it as irrelevant. Now, watching from the perspective of eternity, I could see how that single act of cruelty had wounded both the servant and my own soul. Every act of violence, no matter how small, created separation between myself and the love God wanted to give me. Watch carefully, Jesus said as the scene played out. See how each choice either opened your heart or closed it further. I saw my 20th birthday celebration, a lavish party where I had publicly humiliated a cousin who had suggested donating some of the party's budget to local charities. I had mocked his suggestion as naive idealism, earning laughter from the other young royals present. But now I could see the disappointed sadness in my cousin's eyes, and worse, I could see how my rejection of his charitable impulse had grieved the Holy Spirit who had been working through him to soften my heart. The business years brought even more painful revelations. I watched myself at 25, deliberately underpaying workers on a construction project, knowing they had no recourse against a member of the royal family. The extra profit had meant nothing to me, but those stolen wages had meant everything to families struggling to feed their children. I saw one worker, a man named Hassan, going home to explain to his wife that they would have to delay their daughter's medical treatment because the prince had decided their labor was worth less than agreed. Scene after scene revealed the true cost of my selfishness and pride. I saw business partners whose trust I had betrayed, employees whose ideas I had stolen, competitors whose reputations I had destroyed through lies and manipulation. Each act of cruelty had seemed justified at the time, necessary for maintaining my position and advancing my interests. Now I could see how each one had built higher walls around my heart, making it harder for love to penetrate the fortress of my ego. But Jesus was not showing me these scenes to condemn me. With each painful memory, he provided commentary that revealed his perspective on my choices. When I saw myself refusing to help a beggar outside the mosque, Jesus showed me how that beggar was actually an angel sent to test my compassion. When I watched myself cheating on a business contract, he revealed how my dishonesty had prevented him from blessing me with far greater opportunities that required trustworthiness as a prerequisite. I was not trying to restrict your joy, Jesus explained as we watched my 32nd birthday, where I had celebrated another successful year of accumulating wealth and power. I was trying to prepare you for joy beyond anything you could imagine, but joy requires a clean heart, and you kept choosing things that made your heart dirty. The most difficult scene came from just 2 years before my death. I watched myself sitting in my private study, reading through financial reports, while completely ignoring my younger brother Faisal, who had come to me for advice about his struggling marriage. I had been so focused on profit margins that I had dismissed his emotional crisis as weakness unworthy of my attention. The scene showed Faisal leaving my office with tears in his eyes, feeling more alone than ever. He needed his older brother that night, Jesus said, and his voice carried deep sadness. He needed someone to listen, to care, to offer wisdom and support. Instead, he found only indifference. The review continued for what felt like hours, revealing layer upon layer of missed opportunities for love, service, and genuine connection with other people. But gradually, the scenes began highlighting different moments, times when my heart had stirred with unexpected compassion or when I had acted with uncharacteristic kindness. I saw myself at age 8, secretly giving my favorite toy to a servant's child whose own toys had been destroyed in a fire. I had forgotten that act completely, but Jesus had remembered it. I saw myself at 19, privately paying for medical treatment for an employee's mother, swearing him to secrecy because I did not want to appear soft to my peers. I watched myself at 28, staying up all night to help a distressed cousin work through financial problems, offering advice and emotional support that I had never acknowledged as significant. These moments matter more than you ever knew, Jesus said, as we watched me comforting my grandmother during her final illness, holding her hand and reading to her when everyone else was too busy with political affairs to visit. Every act of genuine love, no matter how small, created space in your heart for more love to enter. So I'm asking you now, just like a brother would, if your life flashed before you today, would you be ready to face the truth about every choice you've ever made? Would you be prepared to see not just your successes and achievements, but also the hidden motives behind your actions and the real impact of your words on other people's hearts? The life review was showing me that everything I had considered important in life had been temporary and ultimately meaningless, while everything I had dismissed as unimportant had been the only things with eternal significance. Wealth, status, political power, business success, all of it would crumble to dust. But every moment of genuine love, every act of selfless service, every choice to value others above myself, these were the treasures that lasted forever. Now, do you understand why I came to find you? Jesus asked as the final scenes faded away. You were never meant to live for yourself alone. You were created to love and be loved, to serve and be served, to give and receive in the eternal dance of divine relationship. Sin separated you from that purpose, but love has brought you back home. As the final scenes of my life review faded into the radiant light surrounding us, Jesus turned to face me directly. His expression had changed from the gentle compassion of moments before to something more serious, more purposeful. The love in his eyes remained constant, but now I could see the weight of divine authority resting on his shoulders. He was not just my savior in that moment. He was my king, preparing to give me a commission that would change everything. Dawood, he said, and my name on his lips carried the power of creation itself. I am sending you back. The words hit me like a physical blow. Back. To where? To the world I had just left behind, where my body lay riddled with bullets on a hospital table, to the life of emptiness and pride that had led me into that dark tunnel. The very thought filled me with confusion and something approaching panic. But Lord, I stammered, still struggling to process what he was telling me. My body is dead. The doctors, my family, they have all seen me die. How is it possible to return? His smile was gentle but filled with the confidence of someone who commanded the very forces of life and death. I am the resurrection and the life, Dawood. Death has no power over those I choose to call back. Your time on earth is not finished. He began walking around me in a slow circle, and with each step I could feel the purpose behind his words, settling into my consciousness like seeds being planted in fertile soil. This was not a casual decision or a temporary reprieve from death. This was a divine mission, carefully planned and purposefully executed. You must tell others what you have seen here, Jesus continued, his voice growing stronger and more authoritative with each word. You must share the truth about who I am, about the love that exists beyond the veil of death, about the reality of eternal life that awaits all who believe in me. The implications of his words began to dawn on me, and they were terrifying. In Saudi Arabia, converting from Islam to Christianity was not just socially unacceptable, it was punishable by death under religious law. Sharing a testimony about Jesus appearing to me, claiming that he was God incarnate rather than merely a respected prophet, would be considered the worst form of blasphemy. I would not just lose my position and my wealth, I would likely lose my life all over again. Lord, I said, my voice trembling with the weight of understanding, you know where I come from, who my family is, what my culture believes. If I speak about you as you truly are, if I tell people that you appeared to me and claim to be God, they will kill me. My own family will consider it their religious duty to silence me. Jesus stopped walking and stood directly in front of me, his piercing gaze seeing straight through to my soul. Many will reject you, even those you love most. Your family will turn against you. Your friends will abandon you. The religious leaders will condemn you as a deceiver and a heretic. The government may seek to imprison you, or worse. Each word he spoke confirmed my worst fears about what following him would cost me. This was not some gentle religious conversion that could be kept private or practiced quietly in the safety of my own heart. This was a complete transformation that would require me to stand publicly against everything my culture held sacred, to challenge the very foundations of the faith I had been born into. Your wealth will disappear, Jesus continued, and I could hear both sadness and certainty in his voice. Your position as a prince will become meaningless. Your inheritance will be taken away. Everything you have spent your life building will crumble to dust. The list of losses grew longer and more devastating with each sentence. I thought about my mother, who had raised me to be a faithful Muslim and a responsible member of the royal family. How could I break her heart by rejecting everything she had taught me to value? I thought about my younger brothers, who looked up to me as an example of success and respectability. How could I shame them by becoming an outcast and a criminal in the eyes of our society? But some will hear and believe, Jesus said, and suddenly his voice filled with joy that seemed to make the very light around us brighter. Some will recognize the truth in your words because the same spirit that has transformed your heart will be working in theirs. Some will find eternal life because you are willing to share what I have shown you. He reached out and placed his hands on my shoulders, and I could feel strength flowing from his touch into every part of my being. This was not just human courage or determination. This was divine power being imparted to me for the mission ahead. Following me will cost you everything you hold dear in this world, Jesus said, his voice now carrying both infinite tenderness and absolute authority. But I will never leave you nor forsake you. When your family rejects you, I will be your family. When your friends abandon you, I will be your friend. When the world takes away your earthly treasures, I will give you treasures in heaven that can never be stolen or destroyed. The choice he was offering me was stark and undeniable. I could return to life with the mission to share his truth, knowing it would cost me everything I had valued in my previous existence, or I could refuse, though what that refusal would mean was not entirely clear. The love radiating from him told me that even if I said no, he would not stop loving me, but the opportunity to serve him in this way might never come again. I need you to understand the full cost before you decide, Jesus said. This is not a burden I place on you lightly. You will face persecution, betrayal, loneliness, and very likely martyrdom. Your comfortable life as a Saudi prince is over forever, whether you accept this mission or not, because you have seen me and been changed by my presence. The question is whether you will use that change to serve my purposes or try to hide from them. I looked into his eyes and saw eternity stretching in both directions, past and future. I saw the countless souls who were searching for truth, just as I had searched, living lives of quiet desperation behind masks of religious observance or material success. I saw the fear and hopelessness that drove people to violence, the emptiness that no amount of wealth or power could fill, the deep hunger for love and meaning that only He could satisfy. "Are you willing, Dawood?" Jesus asked. And I knew that this moment would determine not just my own eternal destiny, but potentially the destinies of everyone I would encounter in whatever life awaited me. I fell to my knees before Him one final time, not in fear or obligation, but in complete surrender to His will. "Yes, Lord," I whispered, and the words came from the deepest place in my soul. "I am willing. Use me however you see fit." The smile that spread across His face was brighter than the sun, filled with such joy and approval that I felt I could face any persecution, any loss, any suffering, just to see that expression on His face again. He knelt down beside me and placed His hand over my heart, and I felt warmth and power flowing through me like electricity. "Then receive my spirit," He said, "and go back to share my love with a world that desperately needs to know that death is not the end, that love is stronger than hate, and that I am waiting with open arms for all who will come to me." He touched my chest with fingers made of light, and I felt myself beginning to fall backward through space, leaving the radiant presence of perfect love and returning toward the broken world I had left behind. The sensation of falling backward through space was unlike anything I had experienced during my journey into the tunnel of darkness. This time, I was surrounded by Jesus' light, carried by His love rather than pulled by some malevolent force. I could feel myself approaching the physical world again, moving toward the hospital room where my body lay on the examination table. The transition was gentle but irreversible, like being lowered into warm water after floating in weightless air. Suddenly I gasped. The sound erupted from my throat with such violence that it startled even me. Air rushed into lungs that had been still for 8 minutes, filling them with a burning sensation that was both painful and wonderful. My eyes snapped open, and the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room felt like daggers after the gentle radiance of Jesus' presence. But I was alive, impossibly, miraculously, undeniably alive. The first sound I heard was the frantic beeping of monitoring equipment that had been silent moments before. Then came the shouting, doctors and nurses calling out medical terminology as they scrambled to understand what was happening. One nurse dropped a clipboard, the metal clattering against the tile floor. Another was checking and rechecking the machines, as if the equipment itself must be malfunctioning. "Where is he?" The words came out as a desperate whisper, my throat raw from the trauma my body had endured. "Where is Jesus?" The medical team exchanged glances of confusion and concern. Dr. Mansour, the emergency physician who had been overseeing my case, leaned over me with a penlight, checking my pupils for signs of brain damage. His face was pale with shock, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning in the room. "Prince Dawood, you have been unconscious," he said carefully, his voice professional but shaky. "You suffered severe trauma and lost a significant amount of blood. You may be experiencing hallucinations due to oxygen deprivation." But I knew what I had seen, what I had experienced, was far more real than anything in that sterile hospital room. The love I had felt in Jesus' presence was still flowing through my veins, more real than the blood that had been pumped back into my body. The peace that had filled my spirit in His presence remained constant, unshakable even amidst the chaos of my miraculous return. family members began flooding into the room within minutes of my revival. My brother Faisal arrived first, his face streaked with tears, and his clothes disheveled from hours of pacing in the waiting room. When he saw my open eyes, he collapsed against the wall, sobbing with relief and disbelief. My uncle Mohammed pushed through the crowd of medical personnel, demanding explanations that no one could provide. "The prince has been clinically dead for 8 minutes," Dr. Mansour explained to the gathering family members. His heart had stopped completely. There was no brain activity. By every medical standard, he was deceased. I have never seen anything like this recovery in 30 years of practice. My mother arrived 20 minutes later, having been rushed from our family compound by helicopter. When she saw me sitting up in the hospital bed, speaking coherently and asking for water, she fainted. The same medical team that had just witnessed my resurrection had to revive her with smelling salts and emergency hydration. The sight of her unconscious form reminded me viscerally of how impossible my return from death must appear to everyone around me, but the changes in me went far deeper than just the miracle of restored life. As family members and friends gathered around my bed over the following hours, I found myself looking at each person with completely different eyes. The love that Jesus had shown me in that radiant place was now flowing through me toward everyone I encountered. My uncle Ahmed, who had always annoyed me with his political opinions, now seemed precious and beloved. The young nurse checking my vital signs, whom I would previously have ignored as mere staff, now appeared to me as someone deserving of respect and kindness. The transformation was so dramatic that even my closest family members began commenting on it within the first day. My brother Khalid, who had not yet been arrested for his role in orchestrating my assassination, visited me with obvious nervousness. Instead of the anger and desire for revenge that everyone expected, I felt only compassion for him. When he tentatively approached my bedside, clearly terrified of my reaction, I reached out and took his hand. "I forgive you," I said, and meant it completely. The forgiveness was not something I generated through willpower or religious duty. It flowed naturally from the love Jesus had placed in my heart. Khalid broke down weeping, confessing his involvement in the plot against my life and begging for mercy he was certain he did not deserve. That night, alone in my private hospital room, I experienced something that would become a constant companion for the rest of my earthly life. I could sense Jesus' presence with me, not visibly as I had seen him in that place beyond death, but spiritually, intimately, continuously. It was as if he had left part of himself within me when he sent me back, a living connection to the divine love I had experienced so completely. I began speaking to him in whispers, afraid that hospital staff might overhear and report my conversations to family members who were already concerned about potential brain damage from my ordeal. But the conversations were as real and meaningful as any I had ever had with another person. Jesus was teaching me, comforting me, preparing me for the mission he had given me. Over the next week of recovery, I started making small changes that my family initially attributed to trauma-induced personality shifts. I began treating our household staff with unprecedented kindness and respect, learning their names, asking about their families, and listening to their concerns with genuine interest. The servants were so shocked by this behavior that some wondered aloud if the shooting had damaged my memory of how a prince should conduct himself. I requested that my personal Quran be brought from home, but when it arrived I found myself unable to read it with the same reverence I had always felt. The words seemed hollow compared to the living truth I had encountered in Jesus. Instead, I began secretly searching online for information about Christianity, reading digital copies of the Bible on my tablet late at night when nurses thought I was sleeping. The Gospel of John became my favorite book, especially the passages where Jesus claimed to be the way, the truth, and the life. Those words resonated with my experience so powerfully that I would read them over and over, each time remembering the moment when Jesus had spoken those very words to me in that place of perfect light. My first attempt to share my testimony came 3 weeks after the shooting, when my youngest brother Saeed visited me at home during my continued recovery. He had always been the most spiritually sensitive member of our family, the one who asked questions about the meaning of life and the nature of God that our traditional religious education could never fully answer. Something extraordinary happened to me when I died, I told him carefully, testing the waters before revealing the full truth. I saw things, experienced things, that have changed my understanding of God and life and death. Saeed leaned forward with intense interest, his eyes bright with curiosity. This was exactly the kind of conversation he had been hoping for since childhood, a chance to explore spiritual mysteries beyond the boundaries of conventional religious instruction. I met Jesus, I said simply, and watched his expression shift from excitement to confusion to concern. You mean you had a vision of the Prophet Isa? He asked, trying to fit my experience into familiar Islamic categories. No, I replied, knowing that this moment would determine whether my own brother would become an ally or an enemy in the mission Jesus had given me. I met Jesus as he truly is, not just a prophet but the Son of God, the Savior who died for our sins and rose again, the one who has power over death itself. The conversation that followed lasted for hours and ended with Saeed storming out of my room, shouting that the shooting must have damaged my brain more severely than the doctors had realized. But I had planted a seed, and I could trust Jesus to water it in his own time and way. I lost my life in that shooting room, but Jesus gave me a new one. Every day I wake up knowing I am living on borrowed time. But I would rather live one day in his truth than a lifetime in comfortable lies. The cost has been exactly what he warned me it would be. My family has largely disowned me. My inheritance has been revoked. Former friends cross the street to avoid speaking with me. But some have listened. Some have heard the love in my words and recognized the truth of what I experienced. A handful of servants from our household have secretly begun following Jesus. 2 business associates have asked me to tell them more about what happened when I died. One cousin has started reading the Bible in private, hungry for the same peace and purpose that now fills my life. Now ask yourself this final question. If truth himself appeared to you today, if love incarnate stood before you and offered to transform your life completely, would you have the courage to say yes? Would you be willing to lose everything the world values in order to gain everything that truly matters? The choice is yours, but I can tell you from experience that he is worth losing everything for.